largest hurdles that stops people from applying in the first place is the idea that it's a really expensive course, it's difficult to get funding. So we're here to try and answer this in hopefully understandable terms about costs, the main sources of income and funding you get, and any sort of extra income that you can find and may be eligible for. Okay. So again, just a quick breakdown of our event. So can you afford it? We're going to go over student finance, because that's where you'll find a lot of your source of income comes from. NHS bursary, which becomes relevant in years 2 to 4. A little bit about whether you can actually work alongside your studies, and then again, additional bursaries at the end. So the big question, can you afford it? For the large majority of people, there is no reason why graduate entry medicine should be unaffordable. Again, it may seem expensive at first glance, especially if you've been going around online, looking at the university web pages and seeing the tuition fee and the whole situation with that. But we'll get to that later. And once we explain how much you can get from student finance, how much you can get from the NHS bursary, and you can all sort of get together what you can get, where it comes from, and figure it out, you'll find that it becomes manageable and becomes a lot less intimidating of a prospect. So before you start budgeting, you need to know what the course costs. So the main issue is you have the £9,250 tuition fee, which is part covered by student finance. You then have to account for the cost of living potentially away from family, living in a new city, food, rent, expenses for equipment like books, stethoscopes, all that sort of stuff. And that can take a toll. That can add up, as you'll find. But there is good news, and that is there is actually funding. So a lot of people think for a second degree that you don't get any funding whatsoever. Graduate entry medicine happens to be a special case for this. So unlike any other second degree, you can get funding all throughout your 4 years of study for graduate entry medicine. It's a combination of student finance and NHS bursary. It, like your previous degree, will be based on your family or your own income if you live independent of your parents. But there is both a means-tested and a non-means-tested allotment. So I think the first thing we'll cover for this will be the student finance section for this. So I will put a quick proviso up front. The note about student finance will be in reference to Student Finance England, assuming you're living outside of London and independently of your parents. If you fall into either of the other two categories, there will be some slight changes that I will mention. And if you're a student from Scotland or from Wales, there are also further changes that I'll address slightly later on. So, Student Finance England. The first important bit is that you get a non-means tested loan towards your tuition fee of £5,785. You'll note that that isn't the full 9,250, but we will address later on how to help make that up. You can then get a partially means-tested maintenance loan of up to £8,944. This is the same as any other undergraduate degree, the same as you'll have had in your last 3 years. So for your first year, it works essentially the same. The difference being for medicine, because it is a longer course, particularly for graduate entry, it's 2 years compressed into one. So it's more like a 40-week course than a 33. You actually get a small bonus of a long course allowance. This doesn't amount to too much. So using my own student finance from first year, because I happen to get the maximum means tested loan, it came to £9,328, split evenly over the 3 terms paid at the start of each term. So it's a sizable amount, as you can see, if you meet the requirements for the maximum means tested. If you're living with someone else rather than just yourself, so if you have like children under 17 or if you have adult dependents that you're a carer for, you are privy to other additional payments from Student Finance. On Student Finance England's website, there is a calculator. If you run through a load of multiple choice questions, it will give you a brief breakdown of which ones you're eligible to apply for and roughly how much they will total to. So I really recommend having a look at that if you can. Once you get past your first year, years 2 to 4, the funding changes once again. So these 3 years have the same funding as each other, but it's much less than you got in your first year because NHS bursary is meant to come in and make up the slack. So you'll get a non-means tested tuition fee loan of £5,535 and a non-means tested maintenance loan of £2,389. And that is all you'll get from student finance. There's no means testing for years 2 to 4. It's just a flat rate for everyone. And as I said before, for Scotland and Wales, it works slightly differently. So Scotland, if you live in Scotland and you apply to a UK university, then you don't get any help from any sort of funding body for your tuition fees. You have to pay the full tuition fee yourself, and that can be quite pricey. As you'd imagine, £9,000 is no small amount. If you're Scottish and you apply to one of the 2 Scottish universities that do graduate entry medicine, i.e. St Andrews or Dundee, then your fees are completely covered by the Scottish Government. You could then apply for a means-tested student loan from the SAAS, which gives you I believe it's on the website. It's about £6,000 per year, so it's a decent number. You can then get a further bursary from the government of £4,000 before you start your course. That was a new thing that was introduced to try and encourage people to go for second degrees, particularly in medicine. And then if you agree to work for Scotland's NHS service for an notably undisclosed number of years, you can get an additional £4,000 per year on top of all the previous benefits. So if you're Scottish and you want to do medicine as a second degree, financially, Scotland is the place that will serve you best. Wales, it's pretty much the same as for English students. However, Student Finance Wales has a special list of bursaries that they can give to students from Wales who study in Wales, and particularly those who are Welsh speaking. So there's a massive push for Welsh speaking people to get into high earning careers. So if you can speak Welsh and you live in Wales and you go to a Welsh university, then you can get a decently sizable bursary to help encourage your study, just because you do speak Welsh. Best details for that are on Swansea's website, which I've linked on that page. And I believe that's the student finance section. So whistle stop tour of that. Any questions?
I'll just point out as well, if you were wondering, for the when Michael said about in the years 2, 3 and 4, so the other part of the tuition fee not covered by the loan of £5,535, that's just covered by the NHS bursary, so you don't have to pay that. You only have to pay the first part. The difference between the loan and the full amount in first year, that's the only time you need to pay that.
To the question in the chat about EU state being an EU student, I don't know the answer to that one yet. I shall have a look and get back to you by the end of the talk about that.
Oh, you're muted, Abby.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, I've just got all the chat notifications popping up. If you are an EU from the EU and you have settled status, you can qualify for Student Finance England. It does vary based on certain kind of people's individual kind of statuses. However, Student Finance has a really good section since Brexit and everything that now explains kind of if you're from the EU but you have pre-settled status, kind of how it works for you now. So the Student Finance England website is the best place to go for that, and it's quite clear. You just have to navigate your way to that section of the website, and I'm happy to provide the link if you would like it.
Okay, and to Magda. Graduated 11 years ago, are you entitled to student loans? If you are a resident of the UK, then yes, you can apply to Student Finance England. It should be no issues. As long as you have just one previous degree, any sort of postgraduate study, so masters or PhDs, don't count towards that. So if you have just one undergraduate degree, then you can apply for further funding for graduate entry medicine. Any other questions, or should we move on to the NHS bursary part? Maria, if it was an integrated master's, then the same still applies. You can still get funding as long as you only have one undergraduate degree. Yeah, Magda again, same sort of thing.
For Anita, it's the opposite. So the £5,535, that's off Student Finance England, and then the other part is that's the support from NHS bursary.
Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified that a little bit better. So the £5,000 goes straight as the tuition fee, and the £2,000 you get as a maintenance loan. NHS bursary will make up the rest of the tuition fee for those years. We'll come on to that just now then, so we can clarify that. So here we go. Year one, it's not applicable. You don't apply to it at all. You apply to it for your second to fourth years. And as you can see, you can get a tuition fee grant for the remainder of the tuition fee. You can then get a non-means tested grant of £1,000. That's flat out, that's given to everyone. And then you can get a further means tested grant of up to 2,643, and then again an additional extra week's allowance. So you end up with a net grant of £5,491 in total, and that is paid to you. So from the NHS bursary, it's 3,700 to the university and 5,490 to you. That is paid in monthly instalments as opposed to termly. So just keep that in mind when it comes to budgeting and having to pay rent up front, etc. Now, the NHS bursary is means tested, as is the first year of your student finance. And again, it's dependent on your family income or your income if you've been living independent from your parents. The way they state it on their website is for every £9.50 of your annual income over £24,279, you will lose £1 of your grant and a £45 just flat reduction. So essentially what this means is if you earn less than £24,279 in a year, then you will just get the maximum. If you earn, say, £3,000, you will get a reduction of £647 on your total NHS bursary that's paid to you. So some back of the packet calculations, you'd get 4,844 in total for the year. So roughly just over £400 a month instead of 450-ish. If your family and your annual income amounts to over 77,500, then the reduction in the bursary that you get from NHS bursary scheme actually starts cutting into the money that's paid towards the tuition fee. At 100,000 a year, then they contribute nothing towards anything besides that initial 1,000 means tested. But given we're widening participation, I doubt that was really going to apply to anyone. Here's a quick table with a QR code linking to the whole PDF explaining NHS bursary in its entirety. As you can see, the red is the deduction taken from the bursary in total, and the black numbers are what your annual salary would have to be for them to apply. So we discussed this before, it's come up a couple of times, the initial tuition fee for your first year. And again, it's just your first year in which this is relevant. So you will have to find £3,465 to help pay towards this degree, essentially. This will be split by most universities into 3 payments, 50%, 25% and 25% in terms 1, 2 and 3 respectively. However, if you speak with the university and their financial department, you can negotiate payment plans for this to try and make it more manageable. but the main issue most people face is how to actually pay for it. So the obvious big one is savings. Like, most people just rely on their savings that they've made through previous years to help fund this. However, what I had to do, and I think I speak for all the exec members, is we've had to work and apply for bursaries to help try and fund this as well. So we're just going to discuss how feasible that is. So, part-time work. Medicine is renowned for being an intensive degree, and graduate entry medicine, particularly because it's 2 years combined into one longer academic year. People expect you to be studying 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. And while it may feel like that sometimes, that is not the case. You do get free time. Essentially, you have free evenings, weekends free. And if you're good at managing your time and managing your studies, then yes, it's completely possible to be able to work throughout these times. I mean, I know Abigail has definite. And it sounds awful and cliche. But if you want to look for silver linings, then sometimes getting jobs in like related fields can actually be beneficial to your studies in themselves. So I found that working as a healthcare assistant over the first COVID peak, I learned a lot of how the clinical settings ran, how the wards are run, what each person does, how to do ECGs, like got a load of clinical skills and got paid to help fund this tuition fee, all from just one weekend a week. Yes, we'll have a quick discussion of jobs just near the end of this. About specific jobs, that is. So again, as long as you manage your time carefully throughout your first year, it is very feasible to work. However, it is recommended that you find a job that works round your academic timetable, one with flexible hours preferably. Again, you're looking at more weekend work, evening work, so like bar work or again, hospital work. Just to make it easier on yourself, make sure you maintain at least a break throughout the week because you don't want to burn up. And another positive, part-time work does not affect student finance or NHS bursaries. So the only income that counts towards them is either significant income, so say you're earning, again, above 25,000 a year, or full-time income. So part-time income as a student does not have any detriment to those. So question break again, but again, specific jobs that we did. So personally, I worked as a healthcare assistant, so band 2, just on the ward, doing all the busy work, so cleaning people, preparing the beds, making sure everyone's okay. Yeah, just standard HCA work in a ward. It was pleasant. Again, learned a lot, paid decent. And I also did a shift test and trace centre that the university set up in response to the COVID outbreak. And I'm still currently working at that throughout my second year as well. I can find that just doing 1 day a week, either on a day that I have off or over the weekends, works perfectly fine for me. It's completely manageable. Abigail?
Can you hear me? Sorry, my computer's having a breakdown. I have quite a unique experience of working as a med student. So I work 3 jobs and study and run a committee. So if anyone would like further proof that it's possible, then look no further. So I'll give you a brief background about kind of what I do and how it can be a good idea for you. And then I will also go through and answer some of the questions in the chat. So my first job is as a resident tutor. So I live on campus at Warwick and I look after a block of undergraduate students. And in return for that, I get reduced accommodation, which means that I can afford to live away from home, close to the university and my placements, and study. And without it, I wouldn't be able to afford to not live at home and have to drive up every day, which wouldn't be feasible. So there are roles like this in most universities that have campuses, and some private university accommodation also offer the roles too. So they're technically voluntary roles, and what they do is they pay you for your time in reducing the rate of your accommodation. So I currently pay £50 a month for my accommodation, which when you're struggling financially is a massive weight off the average price of a room share. In Coventry is currently sitting about £350, £400 a month. So it's very great for me that I can do this. My second job, I work as an event medic. So I work as a first responder for a private medical company at large scale events, clubs and festivals. The great thing about that is I can pick my hours, so I can let it balance around in first year around my studies and revision time. And now we've moved on to placements. I can balance it around long days and short days of placement. It's also a bit like doing a HCA role where it's related to what I'm going to be doing in the future, which helps with the mentality of justifying your decision to not be sat at your desk and revising for medicine, because you're doing something that in the long term will be actually quite useful and gain you some useful skills. I also work freelance doing remote admin. My current role is with a charity that gives free wellbeing and therapy advice to NHS staff members. So it's quite nice and all well-rounded and together. But it is possible to work and study, and I wouldn't be able to study if I didn't work. I used my student finance loan that you live off in first year to pay my NHS bursary, and so I lived off what I earned for the whole year. So working for me was very important. It's about your mindset at the end of the day. If you have to work, you'll find a way to work and study, but you also have to remember that graduate entry medicine is hard. It's known for being incredibly difficult in the first year academically, especially. So I had to kind of be clever financially and plan times of the year I could work more and times of the year I could work less, so that I could have the same amount of money every month to live off. So we will go through some of the questions that we have. I'll start with some of the ones that were related to student
Sorry,
finance.
can I just add one more thing?
Yep.
Like you said, it's good to assess like which times of the year you can work more. One thing you can do is just work more in the holidays as well, because you do get holidays like any other university course, so you can feel free to up your hours throughout those times a little bit. And so what Bethany was asking about, what counts as part-time or full-time, because you're doing a full-time course, I'm pretty sure like any work would count as part-time. The official, like the technical assessment is an average of less than 30 to 36 hours over a week over the space of the year. So I think it's pretty much physically impossible to breach that whilst doing medicine full-time. So as long as you don't put in like 70-hour weeks over the summer holidays, it would pretty much count as part-time.
If you're classified as a full-time student, as long as you're not working, ridiculous hours and it all starts to look a bit hinky with the tax office, they generally don't mind. And because you're a student and you're a full-time student, you get a higher rate of kind of a tax break before you have to start paying tax on your income as well, which is incredibly useful. So there was a question about student finance I'm going to go back to before we forget, that talks about if you did a placement year, will you still get student finance? The answer is yes, because it's a completely separate degree, and graduate entry medicine has this weird eligibility criteria where it's almost what you did before was just a previous degree, and then they go, right, they're a graduate entry medic and here's what they're doing. Occasionally there are student finance issues where you have to ring them up and remind them that you're a graduate entry medic and not somebody that's just doing an extra undergrad degree, because it's technically classed as an undergraduate degree, but obviously it's technically a postgraduate degree. So occasionally usually it's admin errors within student finance, but they're always easily corrected with a phone call. So yeah, it all generally works out quite well.
Again, just further to that, the latest question, do you not get funding if you've got a master's? You do get funding if you have a master's. So I myself have a MRes, and I was perfectly fine when it came to applying for funding.
Yep.
So it's just the same as everything else.
Yeah, there are students here there are students with doctorates that also get student finance. So that have done undergrad degrees, masters, then PhDs, and are now getting student finance for graduate medicine. It's one of those great courses that people don't understand how much funding they get.
Yeah, literally, whatever you did previously, as long as it wasn't 2 BScs, you will get funding again for it.
So let's just go through some of the questions so we can move on. And so we've got, what qualifications do you need as a healthcare assistant? None, just some GCSEs, and you'll be absolutely fine. It's usually quite good to be strategic with applying for those though, because a lot of the med students in the area will do it. So if you're, going as a new cohort of med students, apply maybe in June or April before you start, and maybe start slightly earlier, because it means you'll get in before the influx of applying med students.
Yeah, beat the competition. And if you don't mind missing a couple of social events, they'll always look like night staff work over the weekend are invaluable. And again, you get the pay bonuses. Mm-hmm. And shifts tend to be slightly easier as well.
In terms of funding, someone's asked if, in terms of funding, I've moved back with my family. Will SFE assess their income as well as mine as a combined household income? It depends if you're over, is it 24 or 25?
25 and over.
If you're over 25, then you're independent anyway, so they won't look at your parents' income. If you're under 25, they will assess your parents' income if you aren't independent. So if you're paying rent, then you can be classed as independent. But it depends on whether you're paying rent or not quite a lot. And just to note that they only look at your family income for the first set of student finance for the first year. After that, they don't look at your family income anymore. You just get, because you get a set amount. So it will only affect the first year, whether you're living at home or not. Someone is asking for clarification about the NHS bursary making up the tuition maintenance loan.
Yeah, so essentially you get, student finance will pay 5 and a bit grand towards it on each year. In your first year, you need to make up the difference yourself. In years 2 to 4, the NHS bursary will make up the difference. It's the long and short of it.
I've just seen a question about, could you please confirm how a full-time job would affect the finance? As much as you can work, I don't think you can work a full-time job whilst doing medicine. It's definitely not feasible. The first year is quite heavy, and as much as you do have free evenings, free weekends, you couldn't work a full-time hours alongside your degree. I think your degree would definitely start to suffer if you did that.
Yeah, no, there's only so many hours in a week. And for it to count as full-time work, you'd need like 40 plus, which is just not feasible.
No. You'll watch there's a very famous YouTube video by a very recent graduate medical student who says she works full-time while she studied. She worked full-time. When she says she worked full-time, is that she tutored every evening. So she wasn't working full-time. She worked, throughout her whole degree, and like I say, it's definitely doable. And doing bank shifts once or twice a week are doable, as long as you're careful about where you fit them around your timetable. So for example, Warwick, we get Wednesdays off in first year historically. They're mainly there to encourage you to take part in sports, but a lot of people will work on a Wednesday because it's a full day. They know they've got off during the week, and then they'll do one day during the weekend or a Friday night shift if they want to be tough on a Friday, and then they'll keep at least a day, possibly two, free to study. Then we've got what if your grades are GCSE and A-level were not that great and you're now doing a relevant degree? Not as we had an event last week where we spoke about how there's only a few of the grad med unis that will look at your A-levels, and it's worth looking at the individual grad med courses to see whether they check your A-levels, but not all do. So Warwick, for example, doesn't take A-levels into account because it's a non-science course, so they don't even request a science degree. They just request a degree. There we go.
If that question happened to be about HCA work, then they'll just take whatever the highest is. You just need like a C equivalent for maths and English, and then they'll be happy.
So someone has asked what degrees we did. So I did a medical sciences degree, which was because I had a complex family situation, and it was the only degree, a science-based degree at a university that I could commute to from home. Michael?
I did a biochemistry undergraduate and then took a year out and then did a master's by research in biomedicine and wound healing, and then came on to here.
I also did a biochemistry degree, and then I had a year out to work. Basically, I didn't do a master's, and I saved all that money in a year, and that's been very useful in first year. So I'd advise saving. It will make your life a lot easier.
So then we've got a question about how I found my job. So I found my job basically by trawling through. When I moved up here, I was in desperate need for work. I didn't have my RLT job that gave me cheap accommodation. I had some savings that were from my previous job, and my previous job while I studied my undergraduate degree was I was a private medic for a theme park, and so I did a lot of first responding there, and I literally just trawled through part-time casual jobs in the medical field, and you generally come across a few. They can be tricky to get as graduate entry medical students because of the way our course works, and they want people that have done clinical stuff first, but I had previous work, so I was covered, but a lot of people that have done similar jobs in previous lives, like nursing, being paramedics, that's generally the field they go into for working during studying. So yeah, and someone's just asked about patient contact, specifically, Michael?
I was going to say, John has said two, so if we make these the last two and then move on and then get to the rest after this.
Yep.
So for patient contact, Warwick specifically, they tried, at the moment with COVID, it's a bit difficult, to say the least. So you'll initially go through your academic years, you'll have clinical skills, you'll then be let loose on bedside teaching. So you'll go around to see patients under the supervision of a clinical education fellow or a consultant, and that's how you'll have your patient contact, but it'll be quite limited within its first year. Once you hit second year and beyond, it goes up massively. And to the other question, you're an RMN. Do we think you could do bank shifts at least once a week? Again, that depends on the trust, or if there's any agencies available. The best thing you could do is look around. There's likely always going to be healthcare work available. particularly if you have like a certain specialty. So again, it's just a case of look at the trusts once you decide on a place and the local healthcare agencies.
Just before we move on, Kate, can you answer the question about taking your year out?
Yeah, so it was partly for financial reasons, but I was going to do a master's degree, and I deferred it. So I was and it was in London, so I was saving up for that, and then also I wanted to go traveling. Didn't happen with COVID, so it wasn't specifically for graduate entry medicine why I took the year out. I took the year out because I wanted to decide what I was doing. But having the money all saved up really, really helped. And it makes me be able to live a lot easier. And also during that year out, I lived at home, and I still live at home with my parents. So I weren't paying for rent either. So that's been very helpful.
Should we move on then?
Sure. Okay, now for the real fun bit. So there are, further to all the funding that we've spoken about so far, you can also look for and apply for bursaries. These are just like grants that you can get. They are quite competitive, however. So you have like two types. You've got your local ones and your national ones. Your local ones will likely be run by your local council or philanthropist organisations that happen to focus in just a specific area. So for me, I'm from Manchester, a place called Middleton. Up there we have the Middleton Educational Trust and the Norton Herbert Educational Fund, and they're specifically for students from our local area because it's quite poor to go on to further education if they've already got a degree and want to do something further. So they're the ones that I applied to, and I found them through my local council's website. I believe there's also an email at the end that we mentioned, a website that we mentioned closer to the end of this, where you can search like your local area for more local bursary schemes. Again, these will typically require you to have a place offered already, but that goes without saying for a bursary for graduate entry medicine. And again, they will be competitive. So there's no guarantee for any of these, but it's just one of those things. If you are strapped for cash, you need to look for a little extra from somewhere, then I'd recommend just taking a look through, seeing what you can find. We do have a list that we put together. So for this one, these are just a quick list of some of the national ones that you can apply for, with a brief description of what they have. So you have BMA charities. These at the moment are focusing on international students trying to study in the UK, but they will provide one-off grants for medical students or even doctors undergoing particular financial hardship at the time. MedicSpot provides small grants. Again, they're quite competitive. They're typically essay-based. So you submit an essay about the topic of their choice, and then it's like an award, basically. You have the Snowden Trust, which is further funding for students who deem themselves to have a disability. So this is on top of the additional funding that you could get from NHS bursary or student finance. This is to help with adjustments that you might need for your course or for your housing situation. Leather Sellers is also quite a competitive one because it's national, and their criterion is just if you're undergoing hardship and you're applying for a second degree. Their grants can be quite generous, but their application process is again quite extensive, quite competitive. Richard Stapley Educational Trust is much like the Leather Sellers, except specifically for graduate entry medicine. And if you feel like doing something else on the side, again, earning money like a part-time job, you can join the Armed Forces bursary schemes. So all three branches of the Armed Forces will have one: Army, Navy, and RAF. There's different conditions that come with all of them. So all of them require you to do cadetship, take up their professionally qualified officer schemes. They all come with slightly different benefits. So the Army has the Army starts giving you money from year 2 onwards and has a big payout once you graduate their PQO scheme. The Navy has a slightly higher salary for your last 2 years when you join them, and slightly higher once you qualify, but their minimum service requirement is 6 years. And the RAF is, again, they probably provide, like in terms of sheer money, like they provide you the most, but they only apply for the last 2 years. But you do get free flying lessons, so it's hit and miss. There's a couple of more specific ones. So these are for specific groups within Widening participation or local to Warwick University, because that's where we're based at. So you have the WPH bursary, which is again for medical students from Coventry or Warwick with a connection to Coventry and Warwick who are going through hardship. This is specifically for year 1 medics. You have the Warwick University Bursary Fund, which was just opened up this year to medical students, I believe. Other universities can run similar things, again, with local councils. So I know Manchester has a decent bursary scheme. Birmingham does as well. So you just need to check the universities that you're applying to see if they have any. It'll all be on their student finances or student services page. You have the Access to Learning Fund. This is a national scheme run by the individual councils. Typically, to apply for this, you need to demonstrate hardship and be referred via your university. So this isn't one that you would be able to apply for in advance. You need to get a place on your course and then demonstrate to your university the hardship, and they would refer you on. You have the Akindole Medical Scholarship. This is specifically for people from minority backgrounds who are applying for medicine or STEM subjects where they're underrepresented. This has been going on for a good number of years. It's got really good support. So they're a solid one to apply for if you qualify. You have the Medical Women's Federation, who have scholarships for, surprise, surprise, women. These are typically award-based, like the Medic Spot ones. So they're not just apply and you put in a lottery. You typically have to do something for it. So essay-based, like academia. And on the flip side, you have the Hilda Martindale Trust Awards. This is for women applying for subjects where they'll go into a field where they're underrepresented. So again, STEM topics, medicine. This is much more just if you're going into a field where you're underrepresented and you can show hardship, then you apply. Like with the other ones, there's no sort of academic requirement for this. And lest we forget about the aptitude tests, they also have their own little set of bursaries. So for the UCAT and the BMAT, you can apply to get your essentially the cost of the exam back in reimbursements or vouchers if you can show hardship to the bodies. So the UCAT one, you apply for the hardship before you apply for the UCAT. You'll then have to provide your evidence. They'll get back to you saying whether it qualifies or not, and then they'll give you a voucher code to use when it comes to register for the exam, which will eliminate the cost of registration completely. For the BMAT, it's slightly different. You have to pay the test entry fee and any sort of hosting center fees up front. You then apply for a reimbursement for your entry fee. So I believe we have a bursary list that we'll be sending around afterwards, which goes into more detail on exactly what the numbers for those are. And this is the website we were talking about, Turn to Us. So if you use the QR code, it should take you there. And you can use just your location to search for pretty much all the local bursaries that might be available to you in your area. You can search by topic if you're doing medicine or any sort of particular aspect of your background. It's a really good website, really helpful. I recommend giving it a look when it comes to applying for anywhere. And again, just review your local council ones if necessary. And again, last but not least, the universities will typically run hardship funds. So this is for students from any course who are going through financial difficulty. There's no set amount for these. These are all awarded and done on an individual basis. Different universities will have different requirements to qualify for this. These are designed primarily for just living expenses rather than cost of accommodation or tuition fees. So they can be a bit more difficult to justify. But again, if you are going through financial difficulties and you are struggling to make ends meet, then apply for them. That's what they're there for. They're there to help you out, to make sure you can get through it. Universities aren't evil people. They are there to help. So, yeah.
I'm just going to slot in a little bit. universities not only have hardship funds, they have hardship loans, which are very often without interest, and the date in which you have to pay them back is usually your graduation day. So they're not like, they don't, you can take as little as £100 to pay a bill because you're struggling and you can't pay it on time, and you can pay it back with no interest over the period of then 3 years, which makes the payments manageable if you're struggling financially. They also a lot of universities, especially medical schools, also have emergency funds, which are a pool of money that they set aside in their budget every year for students, that like if something goes wrong, or students go to them and say, I think I might have to drop out because I can't, this is coming and I can't afford it. They do quite often have emergency funds. It's just about doing the hardest thing, which is admitting that you're struggling financially and asking for money. So yes.
Cool. Yep. So yeah, in conclusion, while it may be a daunting prospect at first, particularly with the tuition fee, it is feasible. It just may require those few extra steps. And if you are willing to look out for support, then there is support out there for you. So yeah, keep going. So again, thank you for listening. We welcome again any further questions. And this is just a quick QR code that will link to our other events.
So someone has messaged anonymously and asked about resident tutors. If they want to email the Warwick WHAM email, which is warwickwham@gmail.com, I will answer them all off screen. Please do have a look at our other events. We've got a really good one next week on work experience. I'm also going to put another Google form, apologies, in the chat, which is a feedback form. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill it in for us so we can make these events as clear and good as possible. So thank you.
Cool. And I've just popped the email in the chat as well for anyone who just wants to copy paste it. Magda, sorry, which link is it you can't download?
I think it's the PDF that Abby sent. Also, just quickly, I'll just say that when I was applying, I used the Turn to Us website, and I used a local charity specifically for Birmingham, because I'm from Birmingham, and I got £1,500, and the application process actually wasn't that tough for that one at all, so it was handy. So if you're from Birmingham, have a look, because it's good.
Okay. For anybody that can't download the PDF, I'm not sure why, because it's working on my side. But if you send an email to the email attached, I will send it you directly back. And I can do it this evening as well. So if you send an email now, I'll do it in the next hour also.
We can also send it as a Word document, if you don't mind it not being fancy, which might work easier for some people.
Possibly. So yeah. But please check out our other events. If you've got any other questions, let us know.
Kate, a question here. Which charity was it you applied for? Yeah.
So it was called George Fentham Charity, I think. And it's specifically to people in Birmingham, and they meet twice a year, so to consider applications. And that's something to bear in mind, because these charities, most of them chair a meeting twice a year to consider your application. So make sure you're applying in plenty of time, else you won't get the funding on time.
Yeah, that's a good point. So like the Leathermans one, they meet between the end of March and the end of April. So for you guys, it would be a case of you'd apply during your first year and expect to get it just before your second year.
Yeah, for me, I applied before I got in, No, when I just got in. So I got in February, then I applied, and I managed to get it in on time. So I've had it for this year.
Cool. Yeah, the Hilda Martindale is a very good one. Can confirm they've done a lot of good.